All right. Hello, Force Nation. We are back with another episode of The Force with Matt and Major. And of course, I have with me Matt Hannafin, and my name's Major Passons. And we're going to be talking about the latest in the Skyforce news. Now, since our last podcast, the Skyforce did go 2-2. Splitting 4 games could be better, could be worse. Kind of a bunch of interesting games there. What were your thoughts overall on the 4 games, Matt?
Well, at least from like the Stars game, it was a track meet. That was 133, 127. I don't think it was probably one of the worst defensive performances I've seen from them this year. But conversely, one of the best offensive performances. And then we saw yesterday on Sunday, recording this on March 18th, they played the Skyhawks, and they're one of the better defensive teams in the league. And so it was really low scoring. And so sometimes when we watch these Skyforce games, they do go at a faster pace, but then when they run into a better defensive team, things kind of slow down a little bit. And you see that across every level of basketball. That's just how basketball is played by nature. But possessions were more at a premium in that game instead of like them trying to go toe to toe with Isaiah Thomas and Michael Potter, like they did in that Stars game. So you hope it's better. Like you don't split, especially when you're atop the standings and you drop to second behind Stockton. But it is what it is. They'll get it back.
Yeah, and it was interesting because, like you mentioned, we had so many different kinds of games. Like we had really high scoring games, a track meet against the Stars, against Mexico City. The first game where they won 90-102, they shot 44.8% from three and 46.8% from the field. Like just immaculate shooting, but only scored 102 points. Like you would think shooting like that, you would score the 120. Then
Feels
the next game,
sometimes.
yeah, I mean the next game against Mexico City, it is a worse defensive game from the Skyforce. They lose that one 119-107, and they actually scored more points, but their shooting percentages were down while taking the same exact number of threes, and more 10 more attempts from the field. So it's not like 10 more attempts obviously is a lot, but it's not a ton in the grand scheme of things, especially when you're shooting that much worse from the field. And then their last game against the Skyhawks, like you said, was just a real slow, grinded out premium possessions, 96-91, taking that win. Once again, shooting 31% from the field. So they've had great shooting games and 2 bad shooting games from 3. They've hovered around, that 45% mark from 2 the whole time. So that's kind of been pretty consistent overall from the field. But it is interesting that in like 4 games, we had 4 completely different types of games. And 2 of the games were against the same team, and it was just completely different, kind of just throwing us off from what you expect after the first game. I mean, you hold someone to 90 points, and then about 2 or 3 days later, they have 119. Like, that's just not anything you would remotely expect. But that's one of the great things about the G League is, like, you almost never know what to expect, right? One game could be...
Yeah, it's. I think it's harder to predict because, again, like, we're going to be doing this a lot. We're going to be repeating this a lot. Like, they're here to develop players. And so when you contextualize it that way, yeah, they're trying to win games, but they're also trying to develop skill sets for these players because they want their futures to be brighter. And so I feel like it's a little harder to predict on a game-to-game basis because it's like, for example, just guys on 2-way contracts. Some guys may not be there. Some guys may be up with the NBA team. And so players are filling different roles. Like in the Skyforce example, Alondas Williams may not always be there. Jamal Cain may not always be there. And so you may not always have that point of attack defense or that shot creation that those two provide. And so guys are filling in different roles. And so it's a little harder to project that way. I mean, in really any sport, sometimes over a long season, it's hard because, you never know what someone's going through. It's a roller coaster. It's toss and turns and stuff like that. And so, but with the G League specifically, their coaches and the support staff, they're there to develop these guys and try to make their futures bright as NBA players or potential NBA players. So they're trying to see something and they're trying to test something. And so it is harder to project in that way. And like you got to find ways to win games in different ways, like at any single level of basketball or any single level of sport. Again, the Skyforce, they play fast, but in a game where you got to slow it down a little bit and you have to run more half court stuff and you're going up against one of the better defensive teams in the entire league. Yeah, you gotta find ways to win and try to grind it out that way. That's ultimately what they did in this last game. But yeah, it was like a lot of different games that we saw entrenched within the last week and a half.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point too about the two ways. We kind of mentioned that in our first episode of to where you might not always have the same guys, but it's really hard. Like you used to this point in any season from high school, even middle school up to professional, you're like, all right, now we have the same team. And every G League team does not have the same team. Like you mentioned, one day, your two-way contract could be there and he's the focal point of the offense and you run everything through him. Next time he's not there and you have someone to fill that void. But specifically the Skyforce, they've had so much turnover recently. It's almost like starting with a brand new team. I mean, role players are becoming starters and then becoming focal point players. And it's just they're constantly having to try to figure out what's the best way to do it to win. And then it's the most interesting league in the world in the sense of the main point isn't to win games. Yes, we obviously want them to win. The players, the coaches, the organization, everyone's trying to win. But everyone understands the most important part is developing those players to hopefully never play for your team again. Like the success of a G League team is we sent this many guys to the NBA, which is just crazy to think about. Be proud of these guys are no longer on our team. It just speaks to the development and the interesting situation that the Skyforce and every G League team is in. I was talking to someone that works for the Skyforce, and they were like, it's the hardest league to win in. And for that specific reason of you never know who's going to be on your team. Guys, I mean, the goals are different from game to game. Guys are becoming focal point of the offense to then the next game are, coming off the bench. And then maybe the next game after that, they're the focal point of the offense again. You never know who's going to be on your team. So it's just an interesting dynamic there that I find really interesting. But I could understand how, as like a viewer or just like a casual fan that just wants to follow, a local team or their favorite NBA teams like Heat fans following the Skyforce, it makes it real hard when players are constantly changing.
No, I'm 100% with you. I'm 100% with you. Like, I'm still like interested by like it's the hardest league to win, and but you're probably right in the sense that, like obviously, it's probably definitely one of the harder basketball leagues to win in, at least nationwide, because of that same reason. But like it's just like again role fluctuation, and I think role allocation is like a big part of this, and I mean, just another example, like Cole Swider didn't play in that second. I don't believe he played in that second Capitanes game, but then he played yesterday. And so, like, you have one of your best shooters, one of your best spacers on the floor, running off of screens and adding a little bit creation for you one game, and then all of a sudden, guess what? Okay, now I'm having to fill in that role, whether it's Olin Carter, whether it's I don't know. Alondas Williams, like you're having to. There's role allocation involved with this, whether it's Josh Christopher, like there's a different dynamic when it comes to the G League versus the NBA. Like the NBA, I guess the way that you could relate it to is like the injury report, and like yeah, guys are in and out. Like you see with the Heat all the time, they're never healthy, and so guys are having to fill different roles. But like you, at least it's harder to predict, like, okay, those guys might be out for a week. They might be out for a month. You might already know that. For G League guys, it's like, okay, I'm playing an NBA game because I'm on a two-way contract. Oh, and guess what? I'm getting sent down and I'm playing 2 days from now. And then I'm getting called back up because we only have 9 active players on our team, 10 active players, 11, whatever the number is. And so I think there's just more variance and there's more randomness, but and again, hammer this point home for beating a dead horse here. You got to develop these guys. So that's really what matters most in the end.
Exactly. And it's real interesting, but it makes it real fun at the same time. So now we're going to jump into some box scores, and we're going to start with the Salt Lake City Stars game. And once again, the Skyforce lost that game 133 to 127. And I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it every time they lose, scoring 125 plus points. You got to find a way to win that game. I don't care if pace is really fast, and that's the reason why they scored a lot, and you scored a lot. Anytime you score 125, you got to win at any level of basketball, and I'll continue to always say that. But I digress, and we'll jump into some of the numbers here. The first one that's going to stand out to me is Jamal Cain with an incredible triple-double. 22 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, 5 steals, 3 blocks. He didn't shoot that great from the field, but even though it was a high-scoring game, it was kind of one of those, it was just so fast. So a lot of people had poor shooting percentages. Another player that stood out to me was Caleb Daniels. He had 23 points, 8 rebounds, 1 assist, but he shot 9 of 16 from the field and then had 3 of 6 from the three-point line. And he's kind of stepping into that role that we were talking about of we thought he could be someone that becomes more of a focal point, and he continued that in that game. So did you have anyone that stood out to you, or was it those two same players, or kind of what were your thoughts on that game?
Just a couple of players who stood out to me. Josh Christopher was one of them that stood out to me. The decision making, I think, for him it can be a little bit wonky sometimes. And we talked about last time how turnovers are one of those are one of their weaknesses as a team. He had 5 turnovers in that game, but I think he was still able to get to the rim fairly well. His mid-range wasn't really falling, but he still shot 8 of 19 from the floor, finished with 23 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 of 10 from deep. But he was a guy who I think, like, I'm interested to see, like, you see the energies there on both ends of the floor. I like his game. Again, the decision-making sometimes can be a little bit wonky, but, like, it's nothing to be unexpected for a guy who's playing in the G League. Really for any player throughout the league. Like, sometimes it's just how the case is. Like, he's also assuming these additional ball handling responsibilities, I feel like. And so he's a guy that that stood out to me. One guy that I want to talk about later was Isaiah Moore. I thought he was really good in that second and third quarter. He had that one cut. There was a play in the second quarter of that game where Alondas was driving baseline. He draws 2. And you see Isaiah Moore do like a 45 cut above the break, and Alondas finds him, and it was just like he dunks over Micah Potter. But it's one of those things where it's like you see him as like a rim runner type player, but he's a guy who's shown those flashes and those instincts, like as an offensive player when he's off ball and like he's cutting to the rim. Like, that's always something that's encouraging to see. So he's someone I'm like looking out for. He's not getting a whole lot of minutes. He played 26 minutes this game, but just in general, he hasn't played a whole lot over his brief Skyforce tenure. But he's just someone who stood out to me in that second and third quarter, and then just in general.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Isaiah Moore is really finding his role on there, and we'll talk about him later in the episode. I think we both have a lot to say about him, about his improvement and his impact on the team recently. It's been a nice surprise, I would say. The next game, they won 102 to 90, and it was the first game against Mexico City. 2 players stand out to me there, and that is going to be Malik Williams. He had 19 points, 14 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal, 8 of 14 from the field, 2 of 4 from the three-point line. I just love what Malik Williams has been bringing recently. His rebounding has been nothing short of incredible. It's been insane. He's been absolutely dominating the boards, and he's continued that. But I also enjoy his three-point shooting. He's been a reliable three-point shooter. I like his shooting stroke. He's also been hitting turnaround fadeaways from the mid-range. And I've tweeted this several times, but if Malik Williams is hitting turnaround fadeaways in the mid-range, there's just nothing you can do. Now, the second player that stood out is going to be Josh Christopher. I thought this was his best game since our last episode. 7 of 12 from the field, 2 of 5 from the three-point line, 2 of 2 on free throws, and he had 19 points, 3 assists, and 1 steal. So if I could be nitpicking, though, I would like him to have a couple rebounds at least. It's always wild to me when a player doesn't have any rebounds, but that's kind of hard to be upset about in a 12-point win where he shot 7 of 12 from the field and had 19 points. He was doing exactly what he's on the team to do, and that's just score. Now, what were your thoughts about that game, Matt?
A couple players that stood out to me. Just some, again, Josh Christopher was another one that I want to talk about, but I just talked about him, and I don't want to steal your thunder with this. But a guy they just brought in, Theo Maledon. He's been a journeyman throughout the league, like throughout the NBA rather. He's played with the Thunder, he's played with the Hornets, he's played with the Suns, former second-round pick. He finished with 6 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 4 turnovers, 2 steals. It wasn't like not lighting up the box score or anything, but I just talked about Christopher and like what he's doing. Like he's having additional ball handling responsibility. And in this game, it was kind of like he was just giving them some spot minutes. And it felt like there was the 4 turnovers, but I see the vision. Obviously when you have a former like NBA player, a guy has experience, a guy knows how to play to some extent, even if I don't want to say flames out of the league, but he's a journeyman. He goes throughout stop and stop. And so 2 of 7 from the floor, 2 of 2 from deep, nothing crazy, but he's just a guy that I'm keeping my eye on. Just another one where it's just like, I saw him on the floor and just, again, they're using him in pick and roll. They're using him to initiate offense. And so that's something that I'm I'm tabbing it in the back of my mind. And then Jamal Cain, it's not his best box score in the world. 5 of 12 shooting, 16 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 steals. But I just love what I want. I love what I see from Jamal in defensive end. And against Ethan Thompson or Lewis, he's just a really good defender and he's just really sound. And I think the G League is the level where we're probably going to say this a lot, but it's where his defense really, really pops because he's so freaking instinctual. And he knows, we talk about them being a bad defensive team, but he's the brightest spot on a bad defensive team. And I don't want that to be unnoticed. I mean, you just highlighted it, but his impact, he has his imprint all over the floor whenever he's playing. And then, Malik Williams has been a rebounding machine, 19 points, 14 rebounds. Alondas and Josh Christopher both had 19. Just an all-around good offensive game from this team, even though they only scored 120 or 102 points. We talked about the top 13 of 20, 29 from deep, an efficient shooting game. And just a couple of things that I kept in the back of my mind with this.
Yeah, and I love your point about Jamal Cain. And people need to notice that more. And they see him play some minutes with the Heat, and that shapes a lot of people's perceptions. But with the G League, especially recently, he's been starting to show more growth. So even in the worst shooting percentage game, he's been doing more. I recently had a conversation with another guy, and I was like, Jamal Cain just seems like an energy guy. All of his points are scrappy. He's not really creating too much. I mean, he might drive past your guy and get a layup. But recently, he's been showing more dynamic and flair in his offensive game, which to me was a good sign of that he's working on. And that means, in my opinion, he has a better chance of sticking in the NBA. Because scrappy guys, you can find a lot of those. So after a while, they'll just go on to a younger guy that might develop into something else. And Jamal Cain is potentially starting to develop into that. So I loved that from his game. Now, the second game against Mexico City, they did drop this 107 to 119. And I think there's an obvious person that stands out here. And you mentioned him in the last game, so I hate to mention the same person, but we just have to. Theo Maledon, 24 points, 6 of 10 from the field, 1 of 3 from the three-point line, 7 of 7 from the free throw line, 2 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 steal, 1 block. And yes, 2 turnovers, but that's not bad at all for the G League. 2 turnovers, we'll take that every day. especially if you're putting in 24 points on 6 of 10 shooting. 7 of 7 from the free throw line. That is like eye popping. For y'all that don't know, free throws in the G League are completely different. Up until the last 2 minutes of the fourth quarter, each foul is only one free throw shot. So it's one shot for 2 points, one shot for 3 points. So 7 is quite a bit. So you don't typically see that, and it makes them all more important. So hitting 7 of 7 is very impressive. I just thought that was him showing that potential he has. You mentioned he was a second round pick. He's played 177 NBA games. Like, he's been around the league. He understands how to play basketball, and he understands how to float around the league as well. Even though, yes, he's in the G League now, that experience means a lot. 177 games is a lot of NBA games. So that's something he can add to this team. I think as he gets more comfortable, we'll start seeing those 24 to 18 point games a little bit more. He's been a good 3-point shooter in the G League as well. So that would be something that, maybe while Swider is at the Heat, Teo is able to kind of fill that role a little bit and add a little bit more off the dribble and other aspects of the game.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say. Like you mentioned, like you're anticipating him like having these higher scoring efforts. And I was just about to bring up the point of like it just depends on who's there. Like if Alondas is there, or if Swider's there, because again, the role allocation, like it's different. So I mean, I'm expecting him to obviously get more run as time goes on. I know it was kind of a preamble for me mentioning him when he had a not a rough game, but just a guy like. But then he has this game in the second game of this kind of 2-game stretch, 2-game series, whatever you want to call it. But it is like the role allocation of like, okay, I mean, Alondas and Swider both played in this game, and he still got 23 minutes, and still did work with it. So who knows?
Yeah, but exactly. Even though you did mention him and you liked what you saw in a 6-point game where he was, off the top of my head, around 2 of 7 from the field, that just shows, to box score watchers, it's not all about just looking who has the most points and, the highest stats, especially in a league where it is about development. It's about seeing those tendencies and seeing, are they playing the right way? Can you see them fulfilling a role on this team? And then will the results come later? Like, I'm not saying stats don't mean anything, right? They can be a good, gauge of how someone's doing, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Someone can have a bad shooting game and you're like, well, they still played good. Shooting comes and goes, but, impact on a game shouldn't matter about your shooting. You should find other ways to impact a game. That's what, people say about Swider and Duncan Robinson, those type of players. What do they give when they don't hit any shots? You saw that a couple years ago with Duncan, and he wasn't shooting as good. He never played. Now, someone closes out too hard, he can dish it out to a teammate. He can go pass them off the dribble. They have to add more to their game. So if you're just caught up in who's having the most points and everything like that, you'll miss some of these guys that are showing what they can do even in their quote unquote bad games. So it's more than just looking at box scores. It's actually understanding what the players are doing. Now, in our final game, since our last podcast, the Skyforce won this one against the Skyhawks, and you mentioned this previously, 96-91. Who stood out to you in that game the most?
Isaiah Moore. And I know I'm mentioning him again for the second time, but they used him a lot as like a rim runner in this game. Like, they attacked Chris Silva, who, if you follow the Heat, who Chris Silva is. He was a part of their system for a couple of seasons. They were attacking their bigs with Isaiah Moore, especially Alondas and Teo both were doing that. And so I liked how they were using him as a rim runner in this game specifically, because it felt like, again, when possessions are at a premium, you obviously you got to take care of the ball, number one, and you have to just generate some like fashionable form of offense. And it felt like they were on so many different occasions. he was getting a free runway to the rim, or he was getting like an open look for a slam or a layup or a foul, like whatever the case was. And so he was definitely someone who stood out to me in this game specifically. And this is probably his best game with the Skyforce so far. But I think just like off the rip, he was definitely one that stood out because they don't have that outlet if Orlando Robinson's not there. Or like there's not a consistent outlet sometimes if Orlando Robinson's not there in the pick and roll game. And so he was definitely someone who can fill in that gap. And it's funny enough, like ironically enough, he played at a few different colleges. He graduated at Fresno State, where Orlando Robinson went to school. He was actually Orlando Robinson's like heir apparent when he was at Fresno State because Orlando graduated the year before. And now he's kind of filling in for him in the G League, even though Orlando Robinson's mostly with the NBA team. So I just think that's like a kind of like a funny dynamic. But yeah, he was the person that stood out to me most in this game.
Yeah, and kind of like what you were saying and we were talking about earlier, he's doing it without as many minutes as you would expect. I mean, you see 14 points, 5 rebounds, 1 block, 6 of 7 from the field. You're like, oh, he probably played a good number of minutes. He only played 17. So like when he's out there, he is making a big contribution. And one other player I'm going to mention before, and we've mentioned him again, but Caleb Daniels, just an incredibly efficient game, especially from a guard. 6 of 8 from the field, 3 of 5 from the 3-point line, 8 rebounds. I absolutely love when our guards get in there and they battle for boards. Help out those big men that are doing all the hard work. You know, sometimes they can box someone out, but they can't get the rebound. It's your job to go get that. I love it when the guards are being physical and going to get rebounds. So that really sticks out to me. 8 rebounds from Caleb Daniels. And he also had 3 assists, 1 steal, and 1 block. So he was contributing in every facet of the game and finished with 16 points. It was just a good all-around game. They really needed it as it was a low-scoring game, 96-91. You need those guys to, you know, there's not always going to be those shots. You need those guys to hit those open shots and those threes to space out the floor for the Isaiah Moores to get their rim running opportunities. So now we're going to transition into kind of like who was a player that stood out over the whole week and a half or someone that improved. And we've already mentioned one guy, so I'll spoil it. Isaiah Moore. He's got to be number 1 on the list, in my opinion. And
go on. There was someone else that I want to mention that I didn't talk to you about previously, but go on.
Yeah. Well, I'll say what I want about Isaiah Moore, and then I'll let you get a piece to highlight someone else because I don't want to forget anyone. I want everyone to, people to hear about him. But so Isaiah Moore is just playing great right now. He's rim running. He's doing the dirty work. It reminds me of a player, and I know a lot of people are going to think like this is a negative comment, but he reminds me of JaVale McGee. And I absolutely love JaVale McGee, but he's that skinny, athletic center that can jump, that can do a lot, but no one's really going to appreciate that much. And JaVale McGee obviously had some bonehead plays, but he was overall a good player. I'm not saying that Isaiah Moore has those bonehead plays. Just when I watch him like screen and run to the rim and stuff, I get JaVale McGee. Maybe I'm completely wrong on that, but I absolutely love that comparison. I love that type of player, like that center that's just big, energized. Like you watch Isaiah Moore get an alley-oop, he's flexing, he's running, he's getting the crowd and the fans and his teammates involved and hyped, and it's a big momentum shift. He just seems like a great guy to play with. And I know Bryson Warren, I did a video with him, and he was talking about how much fun it is to play with Isaiah Moore and throwing lobs to him. And, you have a guy that can, finish anything. So just throw it up and he'll catch it and finish it.
One player that I want to mention specifically because one skill set that he's developing over time that it is at the G League level. It may not pop out right away, but it's Cole Swider with his rebound. Last year with the South Bay Lakers in the regular season, he had just one. I don't remember exactly how many games he played, but he only had one double-figure rebounding game. This year, he has 7 total double-digit rebounding games, including 4 of his last 5. He finished with 13. in this latest game against the Skyhawks. Like, I think, again, when you're talking about like helping out the big men, helping out Malik Williams, helping out Isaiah Moore, helping out Jamal Cain, who's a very good rebounder, helping out all these different guys, like Cole Swider developing his rebounding. Like, we think of Cole Swider, we think of the shooter, and he's still an exceptional shooter. He's been like, it feels like he's having a historic shooting season just because of the attempts that he's getting, and how efficient he's been from beyond the arc, being around like 45-50%. But his rebounding really sticks out to me, as being like that, something that can really help a team. Obviously, because I'm like, rebounding wins championships. People don't really talk about that, but it's an aspect that wins championships. And like, the Heat organization likes dudes who can rebound. Like, yeah, they may not be the biggest team in the world, but guess what? They're going to be scrappy on the glass, and they like the dudes like Terry Rozier who will fight on the glass. A Jamal Cain, a Haywood Highsmith who battles on the glass. Like, all these guys that, I mean, Terry Rozier obviously didn't come up in their system. They just traded for him 2 months ago, but like, they like that aspect of him. And so I think Cole Swider with his rebounding, like, if he's able to continue developing that, like, it's not just the positioning, it's the effort. You build that mentality within you. And so that's something that just really stuck out to me lately from him, because that's not something he's previously had, at least to this level.
Yeah, I love your point too about the Heat, and it's not just the Heat, right? It's a lot of teams love rebounding. But I think it's especially important when you're a bad defensive team. And I'm not saying the Heat are. I'm talking about the Skyforce. So like, when people miss shots, you better get that rebound, because you can't let up 2 quality shots. Like, that's professional basketball. That's going to be a make almost every time. So you got to finish those possessions. And like you said, no one talks about rebounding. They talk about block shots and steals and other aspects of defense. And then they talk about, even screening, they talk about a lot in some circles more than rebounding. It's just like, oh yeah, Clint Capella had 20 rebounds, nothing new. It's like, that's really important. Like, grabbing those rebounds, and offensive rebounds, you get an extra shot attempt, or defensive rebounds to end the defensive possession. I mean, what comes to my mind, and it's not Skyforce related, but it's the North Carolina Gonzaga championship game. North Carolina had like 3 free throw misses in the last 30 seconds or 40 seconds off the top of my head. And they kept getting the offensive rebound, and that sealed the game. So no one talks about rebounding, but in these very clutch moments, think about every clutch moment you can think of. If it's not a made shot, it's typically a rebound that secured the game, right? Like, it doesn't matter if they miss the shot if you let up a wide open layup as time expires in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals, right? Like, it doesn't matter if they miss, if they get the rebound and can put it back up. Rebounds are insanely important, and I think the average NBA fan needs to understand that a little bit more, in my opinion. So like, Malik Williams consistently getting 15 rebounds and 14 rebounds. That's nothing to just be like, oh yeah, he's a center, he's supposed to do that. No, like, that's really important.
Yeah, and I double checked just to make sure I had the numbers right. 31 games with South Bay last year in the combined showcase and in the regular season. 1 double-digit rebounding game for Cole Swider. This year, in 19 combined games, he has 7. Again, including 4 of the last 5. I think he tied his season high in this most recent game. But no, you're completely on it. Like, again, another example, like another NBA example that I can think of. Cavs Knicks last year in the playoffs. The games where possessions were at a premium. It was slow. It was mucky because both teams were physical, but New York was way more physical on the offensive glass. And it was like, obviously Cleveland couldn't shoot, but they weren't able to get any rebounds either on either end of the floor. And so that was a problem for the Knicks, or that was a problem for the Cavs. And so, again, like, rebounding is incredibly important in these types of games. Like Chris Bosh grabbing a rebound, kicking it out to Ray Allen. I don't know. Feels like an important moment to get a rebound.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many like memories of clutch games where it's like a couple
Right.
rebounds make a big difference, and it's something no one cares about. Like, it's crazy when you really start deep diving into it, of how every facet of the game is really important. and you need players to do all of it. Or like you're talking about Cole Swider, that's something you have to work on. It's not just, just work a little bit harder. Yes, but it's understanding positioning. It's understanding how to box out effectively using your size. And Swider's a tall guy, but he's not a real big guy, right? Like, he's not a guy that you're going to put up against some big NBA center like Jokic or even Bam Adebayo, who's not a tall, big guy. But it's knowing those matchups like, okay, I need to be active in the boards and active in rebounding. And it's going to make a difference over the course of a game.
In 4 of those games, I should point out, in 4 of those 5 games, or like not in 4 of the 7 double-figure games that he had rebounds, like 10-plus rebounds in, he had at least 4 offensive rebounds. He didn't have a single game last year in the regular season with South Bay with 4 offensive rebounds. He had 3 once. He had 3 other times. He never had 4.
Yeah, it's being active.
It's being active. Like it's knowing, like again, it's knowing like how to position yourself. It's knowing how to impact the game when you're not. Again, like he's a guy who will make shots, but if you're not shooting, if Alondas is shooting, or if Jamal Cain's shooting, or if Olin Carter's shooting, like how to position yourself properly in order to create extra possessions for your team in order to win a game. And that's incredibly important. So like, again, he's developing that specific facet of his game. And I really like that just in general.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited that we're seeing a lot of growth from a lot of the players. And I believe there's 5 Skyforce games left in the regular season. So we'll do another one of these recap episodes soon, hopefully in the next week or 2. And then we'll get on to some off-season content with players and staff and everything like that. So thank you all for listening. Once again, my name is Major Passons, and this is Matt Hannafin with me. And let's go Skyforce.